So basically what you're doing is you're trying to evaluate, you're trying to figure out what sine of an angle means, or what cosine of an angle means, or whatever. Like we've been using the calculator to find it, but what does it actually mean? And that's what we're going to be doing. So first of all, whenever you have like sine of an angle, 90, 180, 270, 360, when it falls on a line, what you're going to do is you're going to think about the coordinate plane and where that angle would fall, and then you're going to think about the unit circle. Okay, well, with the unit circle is really important for a lot of this, and when we talk about the unit circle, we're talking about a circle that's 1 all the way around. So it goes up 1, it goes over 1, down 1, and right 1. So all the way around, we're looking at a circle where the radius is always 1. What you're going to find out is that if I want the sine of the angle, as long as it falls on the circle, the sine of the angle is the y coordinate, cosine of the angle is the x coordinate, and tangent of the angle is y over x. Now if you have trouble remembering it, we always write sine and then cosine and tangent, but if I put cosine and sine in alphabetical order, cosine comes first, right? So x comes first, so cosine has to be with x. If you think about alphabetical order to try to help you remember which is which, because sometimes that's a little confusing, that might help you remember. Tangent is always y over x, or it's always sine over cosine. Okay? Now, I need to show you the coordinates, though, so that you understand what I mean by the coordinates. So this is 1 over, but what would that coordinate be? Like, what is that point called? 1, 0. It's moved over 1, but it doesn't go up and down any. Okay? Look at this point up here. I know that it's 1 up, but how do I write that coordinate? 0, 1. And then this one would be negative 1, 0. And then this one would be 0, negative 1. So knowing those 4 coordinates will help you if you have an angle that falls on the line. So let's look at the first one, sine of 90. Alright, I know that 90, it's going to start here and it's going to go up there. There's where 90 is. It's at 0, 1. Sine is the y coordinate. So what would sine of 90 be? 1. Because once you figure out where it goes, think about that coordinate, and then think about the y or the x, or the y over x, whichever it is. Okay? Let's look at the next one. Cosine of 180. Alright? If I start here and go to there, that's 180. And what coordinate is that? Alrighty. And then we know that cosine is the x value. So cosine of 180 is going to be negative 1. Alright, tangent of 270. So we know that 270 is down here. And if I think about that coordinate, that's 0, negative 1. And I know that tangent...
At this time, any seniors that needed makeup pictures, could you please report to the new gym at this time? Any seniors that...
Tangent is y over x. So y over x would be negative 1 over 0. That's a problem. 0 can't be on the bottom. And so that means that tangent at 270 is going to be undefined. If I plug in tangent of 270 in the calculator, although we're not using the calculator, it's going to tell you error or something like that. Let me just show you. It says error domain. Okay? So that it is okay to be undefined. If you have 0 on the top, the answer is 0. If you have 0 on the bottom, the answer is undefined. Tangent of negative 2 pi. Okay, first of all, I need to think about, okay, negative 2 pi, what is that? Well, I know pi is 180, so 2 pi is going to be 360. So tangent of 2 pi means tangent of negative 360. Alright, it's at negative angle. I'm still starting over here on the right, but I'm not going to go up. I'm going to go around. I'm going to go all the way this way. It's still the unit circle, even though it's like all the way around. It's still the unit circle. So what coordinate does that fall on? 1, 0. Okay. Tangent is y over x. So y over x would be 0 over 1. It's just 0. It would only be negative if you got a negative in the part of it somehow. Okay? So you can get 0, you can get 1, you could get undefined, you could get negative 1. That's the possibilities there. Now, you know, I mentioned that there's reciprocal functions, that there's cosecant and secant. Okay, so let me show you how you work with those. Those are not on the calculator anyway. Like, they're not there. And so knowing how to find those is important because they're not even on the calculator. So, if you remember, cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. Because, remember the opposite letters? Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to find sine of 90, and then we're going to change it. Okay, to figure out our actual answer. So we'll come back to cosecant in a minute. Let's think about sine of 90. All right, we're going to graph 90. 90's up there. I know that that coordinate is 0, 1. I also know that sine is the y coordinate. So sine of 90 is 1. All right, cosecant of 90. It's a reciprocal. You flip it is basically what happens. Well, if you've got 1, that's the same as 1 over 1. Well, if you flip 1 over 1, you still get 1 over 1. It happens to be the same. It will not always be the same, but it happens to be the same. If 1 is the sine or the cosine or the tangent, then the opposite of it, the reciprocal of it, is also going to be 1. Because when you flip 1, you still get 1. Okay? Alright, let's look at the next one. Secant. Do you remember what's the opposite of secant or the reciprocal of secant? Cosine, because it's the first letter is the opposite. So cosine of 180 is what we need to look at. Cosine of 180 is negative 1. We found it up here. So it's the same. Alright, so secant is the reciprocal of negative 1. Okay, negative 1 is like negative 1 over 1. Flip it, you still 1 over negative 1. Flipping it is still the same. Again, it won't always be that way, but it is that way with 1 and negative 1. Okay, the next one says tangent of 3 pi over 2. We're going to make it cotangent. We're going to figure out what cotangent is just so that you can see how to do that one. But let's just talk about it. So, tangent of 3 pi over 2. First of all, I need to know what 3 pi over 2 is. This is where you do 3 90s. So, what's 3 90s? What degrees? So, this is the same as tangent of 270. And up above, we found out that tangent of 270 was undefined. It was negative 1 over 0. Well, if the question really wanted to know what cotangent of 3 pi over 2 was, then you would flip that. And you would get 0 over negative 1, which is 0. And what that tells you is if one of them is undefined, the other is 0. Or if one of them is 0, the other is undefined. So when you find the reciprocal of 0 or undefined, it's the other one. Okay, so negative 180 is going to be right there. Because it's backwards and you go all the way around. Okay, that coordinate is negative 1, 0. Tangent is y over x. So 0 over negative 1. 0 is okay to be on top, so 0 is the answer. All right, so if it doesn't fall on the line, your answers are going to be positive or negative, and they're going to be like fractions. Okay? So the first thing we're going to talk about is how to tell if it's going to be positive or negative. And there's a mnemonic. There's different ones. One of them is all students take calculus. I know that's not always true, but that maybe will help you. The A, the S, the T, and the C is the important letters in that one. Okay? The A is in the first quadrant. And think about the fact that when it's a positive angle, we go around this way. So that means S is in the second quadrant, then T, and then C. It also spells cast or cats, but it gets confusing about where to start it. So I like this mnemonic the best. There's lots of different ones. What this does is it tells me what's positive where. Okay? The A stands for all, and that means anything that falls in that quadrant is going to be positive. The S stands for sine. Sine is going to be positive in that quadrant, and so is its reciprocal cosecant. The T stands for tangent. Tangent is positive in that quadrant, and so is its reciprocal cotangent. And then the C stands for cosine. Cosine and its reciprocal is positive in that quadrant. If it's not positive, it's negative. So anything that's not there is going to be negative. So before we actually find out what the answers are, let's just figure out if they're positive or negative. So this says sine of 70. So here's our thing. We know 70 is in the first quadrant. All are positive in the first quadrant. So sine is positive. Cosine of 130. Okay, 130 would be in the second quadrant. So this is where we would be talking about. Sine is positive in the second quadrant. So what about cosine? Negative. All right, tangent of 235. Alrighty. So there's 180, a little bit more because I know that's 270. So tangent of 235 falls right there. Tangent is positive in that quadrant. Tangent is what we're looking for. So positive. Alright. Try sine of negative pi over 6. So negative 30 is down here. In that quadrant, that's negative 30. What's positive in that quadrant? Cosine. We're looking for sine, so it is negative. So that I can get to the rest of it, we'll come back to the reciprocals later. But basically with the reciprocals, you, like for cosecant, you figure out what sine is there. And then if sine's positive, cosecant's also positive. If sine was negative, cosecant would be negative. So you just find the other one and then flip it. But I want to get to the actual, how you find the actual answers. So I want to get to this next part. This next part is important because it helps us to actually figure out what the answer is going to be. Okay? We figure out the positive and negative by using what we just talked about. But then we use these triangles to figure out if it's the actual answer. Okay? So, there's two special triangles, and you may have heard about them, like maybe in math too. We have a 45-45-90 triangle, and we have a 30-60-90 triangle. Both of those are special triangles. And starting with the 45, what we know about a 45-45-90 triangle, first of all, on the 45s, the sides are the same length. If the angles are the same, the sides across them are the same when you're talking about a right angle like that. Okay? If you use Pythagorean theorem, you'll find out that across from the 90, the hypotenuse would come out to be square root of 2. So you need to memorize that triangle. You need to memorize that across from the 45s are 1, and then do Pythagorean theorem if you need to find the hypotenuse. That triangle is really, really important. The other really important one is the 30, 60, 90 triangle. Okay? What you need to know about that triangle is when you think about the sides go in order of the angles. So across from 30 will be the smallest side. Across from 60 will be the next smallest, and across from 90 will be the next. Like it goes in order. So what we're going to start with is that the across from the 30 is going to be a 1. And in a 30, 60, 90 triangle, the side across from 90 is twice as big as the side across from 30. So across from 90 is going to be 2, because it's twice as big as what we got across from 30. If you do Pythagorean theorem, then you can figure out that across from the 60 comes out to be square root of 3. Square root of 3 is like 1.7 something, and so it goes from 1 to 1.7 to 2. That's sort of where how the numbers fall based on the angles. Okay, so you need to know those two triangles, because what's going to happen is whenever we do these problems we're getting ready to do, you're going to find the reference angle, and the reference angle is either going to be a 45 or a 30 or a 60. And depending on what the reference angle is, you're going to use that triangle to figure out what we need to find. Okay?
Wait, so if we get a 30 for our reference,
Then I'll show you what we'll do with it in just a second. Alrighty, so we're going to start with sine of 150. We're going to draw it. 150 is over in this quadrant, and then we're going to make our little triangle. Okay? What's our reference angle for 150? 30. And remember, we're not using a calculator, but I think you can subtract 180 and 150 without it. So 30 is our reference angle. What that means is we're looking at the 30, 60, 90 triangle. Okay? And some rules about trig is that if you know sine of 150, then we're going to figure out sine of 30 because 30 is its reference angle. And they're almost the same. Okay? So if I go to 30, what is sine of 30? Opposite over hypotenuse. 1 over 2. Now, the only other thing you have to do after you figure out the reference angle and then the triangle and then what sine or cosine or tangent is you have to figure out if it's positive or negative. Okay? Think about the quadrant. A, S. We're in the S quadrant. So sine is positive. So 1/2 and positive is my answer there. And if I would go and put sine 150 in the calculator, it's going to give you a half. But I want you to see where it's coming from because of what you'll need later. Okay? Alright, let's do another one. Let's say we have sine of negative 60. Alrighty? Negative 60 is down here. You got it backwards. What's our reference angle? 60. Alrighty? That means I'm using my 60 up here in the triangle. I still want sine, so it's still opposite over hypotenuse. Here's 60. Square root of 3 over 2. Okay, then we try to decide, is it positive or negative? A, S, T, C. We're in the cosine quadrant. So what do we think is true about sine? Negative. Alright, you can try tangent of 225. Alright, tangent of 225. So I'm going to first go to 225, which is in the third quadrant. And even though maybe I don't want to subtract 225 and 180 by hand, I know it's got to be 45, 30, or 60 if I'm doing this without a calculator. So which one is it going to be? 45. So I know my reference angle is 45. Okay? I'm finding tangent, and tangent is opposite over adjacent. So if I come to 45, opposite over adjacent 1 over 1, which is just 1. But then I have to decide, is it positive or negative? AST, it's in the tangent quadrant, so it's going to be positive. Alrighty, first of all, I want to change that and figure out what that's going to be. I know that 180 divided by 3 is 60. 60 times 5 is 300. So I know that's 300 degrees. Okay, so then I'm going to draw 300 degrees. I come down here. I get that. It's down there. Well, if that's 300, what's my reference angle going to be? 60. Alrighty, so I'm coming up here to my 60 degree triangle. I'm trying to find cosine. Cosine is A over H, adjacent over hypotenuse. So here's 60. A would be 1. Hypotenuse would be 2, so I get 1/2. Okay, then figure out if it's positive or negative. A, S, T, C. It's in the cosine quadrant, so it's supposed to be positive. Alright. To find the reciprocal ones, you do the same thing. You just flip what you get. So what I want you to do, instead of finding the reciprocal right now, let's think about secant. Secant, the reciprocal is cosine. So what I want you to do is find cosine of 150. Cosecant, the reciprocal, is sine. So I want you to find sine of 225. Cosecant, the reciprocal, is sine. So I want you to find sine of negative 60. Cotangent is tangent. And so I want you to find tangent of 5 pi over 3. So I want you to find these. And then I'll remind you what you do to change them if that question was asked. Alright, if I want to do cosine of 150, first of all, I'm going to come down here and draw it. What's that reference angle if that's 150? 30. So that means that, okay, cosine is A over H. So I'm going to look at my 30 degree triangle and A over H. So here's 30. So A over H is square root of 3 over 2. Okay. It doesn't matter that our triangle doesn't look exactly like that. We still just use the numbers from this triangle. Okay. So square root of 3 over 2. Think about ASTC. Cosine is negative in that quadrant because sine is positive, so that's negative. Now, that's what cosine of 150 is. So if I wanted to find secant of 150, I would just flip that and make it negative 2 over square root of 3. And the negative can be on top or bottom, just as long as there's a negative. Let's look at sine of negative 60. So negative 60, I'm going to go backwards down here. What's that reference angle? 60. Sine is O over H. So O would be square root of 3. H would be 2. So this would be square root of 3 over 2. Okay, think about ASTC again. ASTC, is it positive or negative? Negative, because it's in the C quadrant, meaning cosine is positive. And then to find cosecant, then I would just flip that. Look, I got the same answers for 2 different totally places, 2 different reference angles. That's okay to happen. Okay, next. Sine of 225. So 225, it'd be after 180 but before 270. And even though you don't want to subtract 225 and 180, you know again that it's a 45 because it's got that 5 on the end. It's got to be the 45. And sine is O over H. So here's 45. Or there, it doesn't matter. O is 1, H is square root of 2. Think about ASTC. AST, tangent is positive, so what does that mean about sine? negative. And then if I flip it, cosecant would be negative square root of 2 over 1, or just negative square root of 2. Last one. Tangent of 5 pi over 3. So pi over 3 is 60. 60 times 5 is 300. So I'm going around here to 300. What's that reference angle? 60. Tangent's O over A, so come up here to 60. O and A. Square root of 3 over 1. Alrighty. ASTC. Cosine is positive, so tangent is negative. And then for cotangent, I want to flip it. So negative 1 over square root of 3, and there's cotangent.